And that was my first time in network security. I spent whatever 3 years at the startup doing network security. Came up with a lot of internet standards like virtual private networking. If you're doing VPN from your laptop to your office, I came up with that in Ottawa in 1998, and we patented, and then we gave it out.
Wait, what?
Yeah, we
You're
gave it out
part
to
of
the
creating VPNs?
Oh yeah. What entrepreneurs are forced to do right now is to go out and make revenue.
Right.
You cannot assume that you're going to get this magical funding. Unlike during COVID, obviously with 0% interest, we saw this I call it .COVID event because it's like .com.
Yeah.
But really it was like a co-confused valuation party. I mean, it just kept getting higher and higher and higher until it broke.
Founded in 2017, Startwell is Toronto's independent hub for innovators to collaborate. Our podcasts relate perspectives from the world's most diverse urban population to reflect unique insights into global business, media, and culture.
For me, I challenged myself with the pandemic, and I said, you know what, you got to have fun, because as an entrepreneur, it's such a curious challenge to have to create value when there's not even a market.
Yeah, I think there's so many directions we can go with talking about the pandemic, right? It's a black swan event.
Yeah, man.
You and I have never seen it. Nobody's who's been alive. And so what do you do? And I think as entrepreneurs, I think we're all always looking for that opportunity, that blank slate to invent. And so I think for some of us, it was like, okay, what are we going to do, right? There's a problem. Let's go and fix it. But I also think that as entrepreneurs or anybody, what I saw was that nobody understood their mental condition and how that was causing them to actually not be at their best.
For sure.
Right. And so
everything was changing every few months.
Everything was changing.
So
it was
stage 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, I told everybody that we'd be back in the office in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Right. That was bullshit. And then like 6 months later, 2 years later, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of unknown unknowns. Sure, entrepreneurs like that, some. But yeah, there was a lot of opportunity to reflect, to look at how we were operating before. Do we want to continue that?
Mm-hmm.
So my favorite mental game was like, when this is over, what are we going to learn and what are we going to do different? Because it was almost like a reset.
Yeah.
And I was looking forward to that. And it's sort of like it wasn't over. Like there wasn't a moment when you put your finger on, this is over.
It's not
Let's move on. Let's be better people. Let's do something different. It's like, It's not like a New Year's resolution, you know, where like January 1st, you change.
2020 felt like that initially because everyone's like at home. And then it was a couple seasons that went by. And then it was like, okay, winter, we're going to hibernate anyway. And then spring, will we come out of this? And then it kept going and kept going. And then at that point, I think
it kept going. And I think that started to everyone started to lose it because we all thought that it was just one phase, right? And it would hit, it would go away. The fall of 2020, it was over kind of thing, or maybe the spring.
Yeah.
Or maybe the summer, and then it just kept going and going and going. It was really interesting. I think everyone hopefully learned something from it. That's what my point was, that, you'd come out of this and you'd be like, what did I learn from that?
Right.
Like what's more important, hanging out with my family, going to work, spending an hour on the train?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not. Right. And I think that also, when you look at a city like Toronto, where we're not going back to work, and nobody really wants to go back to work for lots of different reasons, not just because transit and the delays, but I think we've all learned that there are some things more important than showing up to work every day.
Yeah, I mean, this is where I start putting on my sociologist hat, and I say, taking a step back, something I've always believed about this city, right? This is a historically 9 to 5, very Anglo-Saxon kind of city. This is a city where people like clock in and clock out. And traditionally, the bulk of our economy in the city is made up of employment within either government or large institutional kind of style enterprise. So the nature of work for office workers, white collar workers, has been very like Dilbert comic esque, right? People take a train, they travel into the city from their suburban house, then they like try and not poo all day long in the office and hold it all in and chuckle and staple things, and then like go home and relax, right?
And then go to their cottage.
Yeah, yeah. If
Right?
they bought one before the last 4 years, right? If they could afford one before the last.
Yeah, but I think you're painting a picture of 2000 Toronto, or 1990s Toronto.
Yeah.
And I moved here in 2003 from the Valley. And, I'm Canadian. I grew up in Ottawa and all this, but it fascinated me how the Toronto that I remember growing up,
Yeah.
the white, very 9 to 5, big buildings, finance, mining, insurance, it was starting to change.
Right.
But you could still see it. It was still
Yeah.
around, right? And it was sort of like this tug of war. And you saw a lot more immigrants coming in. You saw a lot more tech people coming in, and a burgeoning tech industry.
That was the start of the tech scene. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
nobody believed that, we could do tech. I mean, Ottawa was tech, or maybe Waterloo was tech, but not Toronto.
Right.
And over the last 20 years, we've grown into, the third largest tech hub in North America. But I think we've also changed our culture, right? We're not Silicon Valley North. We've never were. We're Toronto, and we're proud of it. And to your point, it's no longer the mostly white going to a tall building 9 to 5. That's not just Toronto. Toronto is so much more now, right? And it encompasses you, it encompasses me, it encompasses new immigrants coming in, deciding to come to Toronto instead of going to the Valley,
Yeah.
right, from all over the world. And so we're getting the best here.
Yeah.
And we're also getting quite a lot of different cultures, which we always had. And we know this,
Yeah,
right?
the cultural diversity, of course, in Toronto for our listeners all over the world, by whatever stat I've read in the last 2 decades, has been consistently saying that, like, yes, the city has the largest per capita cultural diversity.
Yeah,
right?
51% were born outside of Canada.
Yeah.
That live in the city of Toronto. And that just adds to our strength, right?
Totally, man. Totally. I mean, like, I used to, when I had time to mentor early stage startups years ago, I would always say this. I would always say that, like, there are ways in which you can prototypically test foreign markets by looking inwards at the Canadian diversity that we have, and say, well, if you want a living access to a country that you might want to open an office to, there are people that know that country very well down the road from you. So, like, you don't need to make business trips before you talk to people about that place, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm obviously a product guy. I talk a lot about product, and my last company, I remember talking to customers out in Europe, and they were fascinated that we had time zone support for them, and language support. We're multilingual, multi-time zone around the world, and that was different than what we saw with our competitors from the States.
Yeah.
Who just didn't think about that. And
Right.
to your
Didn't care
point,
about it.
Toronto, we think about that because we are in North America. We're a massive city in North America, but we're a city made up of people from all over the world. And we ask them, where are you from? And we actually want to know. And so we care about that. And we know that we're just not alone here. In our little city, even though most Canadians look at Torontonians and think that we're full of shit and full of ourselves, which is true as well, because this is the damn best city. But sorry,
Yeah, it's like the best worst city. We're like the best worst city. This infrastructurally doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's like clunky. Like it's spread out, but yet there's density, and the density is residential, but it's not like blending into pedestrian reality. And it's like there's a lot of problems from a kind of
Totally. I think Toronto's in this
infrastructural side. There's a lot of problems, but there's a lot of good people, and there's a lot of people that have a want to enjoy living together, which is good.
Toronto has to decide what kind of city it wants. It's in this transitionary period as it grows. It's growing phenomenally, right? There's so many construction cranes out here, more than any other city in the world. And I think it has to figure out what kind of city it wants, because it can't continue to be the old city. Just like we were talking about Toronto in the 1990s being this city that arrested Madonna for indecency, right?
Yeah.
We're no longer that.
Playgrounds, public park playgrounds
Right.
were closed on Sundays. When I moved here from New York in 2005,
Yeah.
They
So-
were closed on Sundays. Like people went to them, but there were signs that said, "This park is closed." The
Yeah.
LCBO was closed on Sundays,
Yeah.
except for the one on Queens Quay. So you could not buy alcohol or play in a playground on a Sunday because you had to be in church in
Yeah.
2005.
That wasn't that long ago.
No.
That was less than 20 years ago,
Yeah.
right? And so that's my point. Like we're I think changing again. We're going through another pivotal moment.
Yeah.
And so you see this war of, I need my car to drive anywhere, or like I need to do public transit or even biking because you just can't keep driving. There's so many more people, and when you look at larger cities around the world, I think they've gone through those tough times, and I think Toronto has not. And that's the issue that we're getting into right now. Like, what does my Toronto look like? Because it can't look like what it was before. There's just too many people here, and you can't stop them coming, right?
So let's talk about your Toronto in the lens of your business life. Okay, wait. You moved here from the Valley and when?
So I came here in 2003. I remember there was two reasons. One, my wife and I wanted to start a family, and we wanted to do it back home. And two, George W. Bush just won his second term, and I'm like, this is crazy. Why would a country vote for this type of president?
Right.
He seems pretty good in the last 20 years, looking back. But yeah, those are the two reasons I wanted to come back, buy a house. We were living in the Valley. Homes were just so incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
$2 million for some tiny little 600-foot shack that needed to be demolished,
Right.
And so we wanted a real family life. So we came back. Our folks were getting older as well. We didn't want to go back to Ottawa, which is where I grew up. Wanted to go to a big city. Toronto was it. And I started working with some publicly traded companies, actually, tech companies. So I just came out of Cisco Systems in the Valley, and I thought that's what my career was.
Okay.
So I had this vision, 10-year vision, be the CEO of a publicly traded company. Right, that was the goal. You always need goals. And so I came up, I was an executive at Cisco, but I came up to be a VP of product and marketing at a publicly traded company. I thought we did really well, 4X on the public markets, that was awesome. But I realized one day I was sitting in the boardroom looking around. I'm like, this is not for me. This is where I'm going to be in 10 years. And I looked around and I looked at my future selves and I'm like, that's not me. I'm not that person. I know how old was I? Late 30s.
Okay.
I thought I was old. And I'm like, I don't want to be this old.
Right.
Yeah,
you're aging fast.
I'm aging
environment.
fast.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it was one of those, pivotal moments where you look at, have I accomplished what I really want to do? Am I in the position that I really, and you do this every 10 years or so. Midlife crisis is every decade.
Every week, man.
During COVID, probably was every week. And I just decided, what I really loved is the time that I did those startups before, back in the late 90s. And so I...
Wait, rewind. Okay, so what startups were you doing in the late 90s? This is like .com boom bust?
Yeah. So I did my first startup after university.
Okay.
Dropped out of university, got bored of coding elevators, and people press buttons. That was one of the tasks. I think, you think back at these memories and it's like, what caused me to move that? When the professor asked me to build that, I'm like, there's no way I'm going to build that. That's boring as hell. I could do that. And I like, this sucks. I want some real life experience. So I actually dropped out of university, went to work, realized that I was really good at computers, programming, and did a startup. And then
what was it?
Oh man, it was.
Don't be embarrassed.
No,
you can tell.
It was so long ago, but it was basically getting people on the internet. Early days.
Yeah, that's what I used to do in high school.
Modems and all this.
Like an ISP? You started an ISP, or
we were building software for ISPs for the first ISPs. We actually sold a piece of our software to AOL.
What did it do?
It got people on the internet. So you dial into their bulletin board, their modems, and all of a sudden
It's like an operating system for ISPs?
Something like that, yeah. It was fun. After 4 years...
Because when I was 15 in 95, I was living in Nairobi. I struck up a rapport with UC Berkeley over email. and the lab that was in charge of BSDOS really loved the fact that this random kid from Africa was calling them, and they were like, they sent me like a BSDOS server config with multi-modem stack to start an ISP in Nairobi, and then I never did, and I went to university instead.
Oh,
But like that was a very that time was a very exciting time.
it
and,
was. We were thinking about this internet technology. We didn't even have like understanding of how big it was, but we were like, how big could this be? Is it going to be better than X? That kind of stuff. And we just didn't know. And I remember within months, the tidal wave just came over and everybody was just, I want to be on the internet.
right.
Right. And one of the things that I remember was I didn't have a good business acumen. I just didn't understand business. And so I understand math and computer science, which is what I took. And I shut it down and I said, I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm going to go and learn. And so I joined a real startup. I was an early employee of a network security startup in Ottawa.
Okay.
And became the chief architect. And we rode that all the way to an acquisition in 99, .com acquisition. And that's actually how I got to Silicon Valley.
And Cisco?
Because Cisco tried to buy us and they failed.
Oh.
We were like one of the only ones that they failed to acquire.
Huh.
And yeah, then they took me out to dinner and asked me to come down.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it was my first time in network security. I spent whatever 3 years at the startup doing network security. Came up with a lot of internet standards like virtual private networking. If you're doing VPN from your laptop to your office, I came up with that in Ottawa in 1998.
That's Roy's little baby.
Yeah, and we patented, and then we gave it out.
Wait, what?
Yeah, we
You
gave
were
it out
part
to
of
the
creating VPNs?
Oh yeah.
That's so interesting.
Remote access VPN, because we basically modified site to site, like static VPNs, to be more dynamic, so that you can walk around with a laptop and connect to whatever. So yeah, that was 1998. We brought it to the internet standards, and that was fun. For sure. And that's what I love doing. I love creating stuff,
Yeah, and then you're at Cisco, and it's kind of like
And then Cisco wants
corporate administrative kind of vibes.
Well, you know what? That's interesting. Cisco was probably one of my favorite jobs because Cisco itself has this culture that is not corporate. It's not stuffy. It's not holding you back and, having this weird culture that you have to conform to. It is very entrepreneurial.
Okay.
And so Cisco really is a bunch of little startups, or it was, let's say 20 years ago.
Sure.
I have no idea how it is now, but it's a bunch of little startups called business units. They all have their own P&L, their own goals and all of this. And really the leader of that business unit is like the president of the company, the CEO of a company, a small company. And so that was really refreshing. It was very, very entrepreneurial. And I love that about it. And then you have their sales arm, which is really the top sales organization that I've ever seen in my life. And that was my biggest takeaway. How do you run a company that has, okay, decent products, let's say, nothing against Cisco,
and sell the shit out of them.
but how do you become number one, right? And it's really your sales and how you treat your customers. You treat them like partners.
Yeah.
And not just like money-making machines.
I mean, if you sit on the product side and the innovation side, you're always kind of compelled to create the best thing that you can create to solve the problem as best as you can, when good enough is often good enough for the client, right? And so like that mismatch of like, the want for innovation to like be pure and cause like a revolution in the mindset of the customer when the customer is not awake to even the problem or, to the problem being so pertinent to them.
As engineers, we think that the best thing to do is to get the best technology and to create the most innovative product. But as a customer, that's not actually what you're trying to do. You're trying to sleep at night. You're trying not to worry about getting fired. You're trying to get your next raise. And so it's a very different mindset. And I think what I learned from Cisco was that the sales organization understood the behavioral needs of the customer, right? And cared. It was compassionate about them. And usually a lot of sales organizations are not, because they're they're pits, they're sales pits, right? And you have to get to your quota. And I'm not saying that Cisco wasn't like that. Cisco would regularly terminate the bottom 10%
Right.
of the sales organization. So, but I think they had a really good balance.
And so what you're itching to get out of there and do some startup stuff.
Well, yeah. So I wanted to go down to the Valley because I wanted to understand why Cisco was so number one and beating everyone else. And then I wanted to do a startup. So after I learned that, 2 years in, I'm like, all right, I'm in the Valley. I want to do a startup. This is 2001, unfortunately, right? So we're still in the dot-com crash. I put together a team of, ex-entrepreneurs who've exited. We have a small, 4-person team. We're doing something in security that's never been done before. We have a business plan. We have no product, right? Obviously, who needs a product?
Did you have an office?
No, I was still working at Cisco.
Oh, okay.
So we put together this business plan, and we started walking around Sand Hill Road. Right? We got meetings. The 4 people all knew tons of VCs, and so we got all these meetings at Sand Hill Road. Yeah. And it was amazing. They were like, "Oh, we love you guys. We love, your last exit," because a lot of these guys had previous exits.
Okay.
Except, we're not investing right now. So it was this time when nobody understood how long this malaise was going to last.
Sure.
Very similar to what happened with COVID.
But also at that time too, like a lot of those VCs you met were probably, if you look at their portfolios, they were probably quite still heavy into like hardware businesses, maybe silicon, like this whole like software revolution hadn't quite taken off.
Yeah, it was 20 years ago. You're right. A little bit more than 20, but yeah, it was just that time, right? And obviously it's come back, it's roaring back, but it was just like, good idea, good team, good execution, bad timing.
Sorry.
And that happens all the time. And if you fast forward 23 years to now, I think we're going through the exact same thing, right? And I like to tell people that 2023 was the worst funding year for startups since 2000, 2021, maybe 2008. But those 2 time periods that we went through are very similar to what's happening now, and for a lot different reasons.
Right.
But the ultimate end goal here is to get funded, and the problem is that there's not a lot of liquidity in the market, right? You're not seeing this virtuous cycle where LPs are getting cash from either an IPO
you're talking about
or an
early
acquisition.
Stage. You're talking about early stage capital. You're talking about first, second check-in.
Well, I think that there's problems across the board. I think that the first check is problematic because the interest rates are so high right now that angel investors would rather, quite correctly, invest in other vehicles.
Right.
Right. And because there's no risk.
If their money's precious to them. Like that,
Sure. And we could talk about why angel investors invest, whether it's actually for an ROI or not, which I think is an interesting topic. But
sure.
And so your first check is really hard. And so what entrepreneurs are forced to do right now is to go out and make revenue.
Right.
Generate some revenue, just like you and I were talking about earlier. It's like you cannot assume that you're going to get this magical funding. And then even on your seed or even on your A, there's quite a lot of people just holding back.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of VCs are just watching. And we've seen the numbers start to come back up since the first quarter, second quarter, but it's still very, very small compared to what it was before COVID.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's a tough time across the board. If like there's less money being spent subsidizing the pursuance of new business models.
Unlike during COVID, obviously with 0% interest, we saw this I call a .COVID event because it's like .com.
Yeah.
But really it was like a co-confused valuation party. I mean, it just kept getting higher and higher and higher until it broke. Well, just like the .com did. Really.
But isn't it funny? It's kind of funny that like, you've got all these like techno utopians that are like, always so primed, especially with like Moore's law and this idea of exponentiality pushing the fold with what's possible with technology. I feel like there's always a quotient of people involved in, the infrastructure of the like tech economy, especially on the funding side, that like feel extra titillated exponentially as more is becoming cheaper and faster. And as possible in terms of expecting adoption. Like everyone, the people that really believe in tech, that are like, super tech evangelists, in all facets of their life, and maybe are involved in finance, are very, very excited about, like everyone in the whole world, their lives being magically transformed, and like the futility of toil being removed by, technology. But there's a kind of a discommensurate, means to subsidizing that reality, and also creating a financial sustainability model for that reality. And that's a whole like
Yeah,
big
I think
topic,
that's always
but
been the case, right?
it's always been the case.
You have very technical people who are in love with the technology,
Yeah.
right? And so they will build that, and they won't know exactly what that solves, but
But-
they think it's cool.
Yeah, my point was that in the pandemic, right, there was that whole thing of like, okay, well, this is going to be the big momentous event that's going to push the fold for tech adoption, because everyone's at home, everyone needs this technology. We're now, like saturated in
Yeah, well, you saw that with Shopify overgrowing, and a bunch of other companies overgrowing,
Zoom,
right?
man. Zoom. If you look at just like,
Oh, I remember Zoom.
right,
For sure. I mean, I was running a scheduling company at the time, right? And that was amazing for us. We
wasn't
thought-
that called? What was that called?
Well, originally it was called Zoom, Zoom.ai, but I thought that was a cool name.
Yeah.
We had AI, we had true AI, but at some point we pivoted to be calling ourselves Calendar Hero.
Right.
And some of that was because Zoom was just too popular and we were getting confused with them. That was one reason. The other reason was that we did pivot and focus more on calendaring and scheduling. But for us, we saw, I think it was a 4x, 5x increase within the first couple of months of COVID, as everyone went home and had to schedule their own meetings, because you couldn't just walk up to someone in the
Right.
office and say, hey, let's talk.
Yeah.
So I think that was great for us, at least. It was not great for most companies. We saw quite a lot of them go away.
And of course, that company got acquired.
Yeah. So last two startups, I've been honored to have acquisitions. We worked 7 years on that one. We pivoted from an AI executive admin 9 years ago, way before this AI hype cycle that we have
That was
now.
9 years ago.
9 years ago, we started with this idea of everyone should have their own executive admin,
Right.
right? Not just a CEO. And AI can help us with that. Natural language processing, so understanding. And so we built basically what's called a chatbot now. You would text them and say, hey, I need a meeting.
Right. I remember.
With-
I remember you showing
with
this to me,
John.
yeah.
And it would know which John, and it would know which coffee shop you like. And so
Yeah.
we had all of this learnings in there. And I think it was way too far ahead of its time.
Right. Yeah.
The technology was also too far ahead
Yeah.
because it didn't work as well. Right? As humans, we're very, very picky about if something doesn't work.
Everyone expects utility constantly, right? And as consumer tech improves, even then, I find it fascinating that people that people still use computers, with the mobile revolution and the ease of use of computing on your handheld device, and then you go to your computer, and it's like, well, where's that file?
Yeah.
Like no one knows what a folder is anymore. But anyway,
It's a good point. Yeah. So we did that, and we realized that nobody had any budget to pay for an AI executive.
and it was
admin.
expensive to provide that, I'm sure, with like the back end stuff that you were using.
Yeah. I mean, the caveat is that we were not using LLMs. LLMs did not exist. And so the technology, the AI technology that we were using required a lot less power than today's AI. And again, it was one of the reasons why it wasn't always working. Like it wouldn't always understand you, which made it fail. And then, we'd see a lot of people churn because it's like, it doesn't understand my form of English or another language. Anyways, I think the point there is that the people didn't actually want to pay for that.
Yeah.
They didn't want that. They actually wanted the very specific thing, which was mostly scheduling.
Okay.
And so that's why we pivoted to that. And it worked out. Like you said, we did get acquired in 21.
How did it
We
feel
learned a
to
lot.
do that pivot? Like when you were so years vested in the vision of what the product
That was a
should
really
become.
hard pivot. Any pivot is hard.
What was there a wake up moment, or was it a slow burn? Was it like, this isn't working, this isn't working, we need to make it work, this isn't working, we need to make it work, and then all of a sudden it's like, wait, something about it is working, and that's the thing we have to double down.
So we had just raised a good amount of money from a large VC, and the large VC was really excited about our AI and the enterprise focus.
Okay.
And we started looking at our sales, and we hired a good enterprise sales team. Half the company was sales, and we just weren't getting anywhere. So we took a year, we weren't getting anywhere, and we realized there was no market, right? And regardless of my, pseudo bullshit to the investors,
Yeah.
right, and their excitement over this, there was just no market. And we tried and tried again and tried different things and marketing and so forth. And at one point, we just made the really, really hard decision to go somewhere else. And I remember us making that decision. My head of product and I were in a room, and we were whiteboarding. And we whiteboarded all of the possible products that we could be, right? That we had known interest in from our customers.
Right.
So this was really customer led. And it was a large board because we added everything. And then we asked all of the company to come in and add their own. Like, what have you heard from the customers that they would pay for?
Okay.
And so at the end, we had this massively long board. And then we went through it systemically and just like, no,
Right.
this isn't going to work because of X, Y, Z. And we actually used data, and we went back and we looked at logs, what our customers are using. And it was really well done. My head of product led that. Amazing. And then we decided on one thing, which was, let's be a scheduler, an AI scheduler. We're
Yeah.
smart, but we're still a scheduler.
Right.
And then we rebranded, and then my head of marketing also did an amazing job. And at the end, once we relaunched, we were like, why didn't we do this like 2 years ago? It's like, it's
It feels right.
it feels right.
Yeah.
The problem was that we lost more than 50% of the team,
Yeah.
right? So obviously we didn't need the enterprise sales team. We weren't going after the enterprise. So that was a hard decision. But there was quite a lot of loss because it was such a different model, and the vision was quite different, right?
Yeah.
But you have to do what you have to do as an entrepreneur.
And I always tell people it's kind of a funny thing. When you have a venture that has opportunity and has almost a bit of like legacy relationship with clients may trust the team. They will have a relationship with you and may continue with you on the other side of a transition, right? Even if you're selling something entirely different. And we see that here with what we do at Startwell, where, teams come for a meeting, have a great experience in a meeting room, love the various ways that we make them feel comfortable and special. And then that translates to their marketing team being immediately introduced to our media production, company. And it's just that there's that trust there, So it's really interesting that you can actually kind of like go back to your customers and say, well, what do you need? And they'll say, well, we'll try what you're going to do because we know you.
Yeah. Well, I think back to my comment about Cisco, right? Why were they so successful? Because they created that trust. They were the trusted partner of their customer. And
Yeah.
a lot of times they actually had an office in the customer's office. They had a desk.
Right.
And so when something came up, they needed to expand their network, they would ask the Cisco representative first. And so that, again, back to my learnings from that time period, I've taken that and I've tried to bring it to every single company. The last one, we were trustworthy. We were thinking about their needs. What do you need? I need to schedule a meeting with a candidate. I need to schedule an interview with the team and the candidate. And so we would ask these very detailed questions about what is bothering them.
Right.
How can we help?
Right, exactly.
And we took the technology that we had built and we created these products that actually focused on their issue
Yeah.
and solved it. And I think that helps the company that excuse me, the company that I've started now,
So tell us about it.
we operate in the same way.
What's it called?
So the new company is called Unified.to. Okay, much like all of my other companies where I pick one word
Yeah.
and I try and find a domain that is interesting and memorable. Obviously, I can't get unified.com
Yeah.
or even .ai because we're not doing AI. But the .to obviously is Toronto.
Okay.
Really, Tonga or Togo. Is it Togo? Tonga?
But there's no physical relationship between that country and your domain name?
No.
Infrastructurally?
Well, I mean, just on a tangent. So
Yeah.
the .to domain is actually owned by a Toronto-based register.
The
Right?
TLD.
The TLD is owned by a Toronto company, and they pay the country of Tonga,
Oh,
and I think it's one of their largest income sources.
it's a fascinating business, right?
It
This
is.
whole TLD business.
And obviously, it can stand for Toronto, but it stands for to go.
Yeah.
And I really want to unify because it does represent what we're doing.
Okay. So what is that? What do you guys do? What is Unify.to?
Yeah, so I always like to do something in a different space. I want to learn the industry. I want to learn the problems, the people. And so what fascinated me for, I think, all of my career were APIs and communicating with APIs. So APIs, this is how computers talk to other computers, basically. Most of the communication on the internet, 80% of the actual connections are happening between servers and servers,
Sure.
API to API.
Mm-hmm.
And so for all of my career, we've always been building into APIs, other people's APIs, Google APIs or whatever.
Yep.
Salesforce APIs, scheduling APIs, Google Calendar and so forth. And so I've always really enjoyed that. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to build a architecture, an API that would allow other SaaS companies to integrate into APIs without building them themselves. Because when I look back at my previous company, we spent about half of the engineering time
building the connectivity.
building and maintaining, fixing.
Because everyone else, like, let's say it's a point-to-point connection, that point you don't own can always change, right? And redocument it.
Totally.
You've got to update.
Yeah. And so our customers would come in and go, hey, the Salesforce connection is no longer working for me. So we'd have to go and fix that. And so I thought that's really bothersome because I was not in the business of building API connections.
Yep.
I was in the business of scheduling meetings.
Right.
That's what the job to be done was. And so I thought, just like hosting, I don't care about hosting. I can go to Amazon AWS. I can go to Google, Microsoft. I don't have to understand how to host.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a server in my closet anymore. That was like 20 plus years ago.
Oh, I remember that, man.
Right? Hosting as a service.
I miss those days.
No, I don't.
Without being nostalgic,
No.
I miss the idea that, like, you've got a server sitting on a desk in your house or in your office, and people are connecting to it anywhere in the world.
Creating a lot of heat, and then your hard drive dies, and
and the whole website's gone.
your entire company dies, right? Or
I
like,
don't miss it
or
for
like
that.
someone unplugs it in your closet.
It's like your computer was on, wasting electricity. I turned it off. What?
So yeah, I mean, like, I don't think anyone listening,
Yeah.
or maybe most 99% of people listening to this, are going to remember that because we don't. And even if we do, we block it.
Yeah.
So my point is that I don't think we should be building integrations, customer-facing API integrations into our products.
Right.
Because it is so commonplace and it is not core, right? Just like we don't build payment, right? Stripe, one line of code, you're done with the payment system, right?
Yes, this is very exciting because I was going to ask you, like, isn't this Zapier? But
The Zapier is not for developers. It's not for a product. It's for your internal business process automation, right?
Right.
Moving data from your Salesforce account to your Mailchimp account, right?
Yep.
And who's doing this? Your salespeople, your marketing people, maybe your customer support people.
Yeah.
Your developers are working on the product.
yeah.
Right.
And at the same time, so am I right in assuming that what you guys are going to create or are creating is something that is not just a way to connect two APIs together, but actually can replace the need for a custom API to be built?
Well, so we don't do anything with your own API. So
Uh-huh.
that's like that side. It's your own API. I think there's a lot of solutions there. We're focusing on the other side. Your product,
Yep.
trying to connect to a third-party API, someone else's API, Salesforce, Workday, whatever. And then the issue there is that your customers now have a ton of different options to use for CRM, for an HRIS, for whatever, and when you look at how many apps we have as
it's
humans,
crazy, yeah.
like 20 years ago, maybe we had 10 accounts. Now we have 60 on average. And so when a customer comes to you and says, my data, my important data that you need, my employee data, my sales data, whatever, it's over here in this product. Do you have an integration? And if you don't, then they're like, well, I'm going to go and find another solution that does. And so you can't monetize them. And that's one of the issues that we had at the last company. And even the previous company to that as well. Even when we were doing ad tech, we had to take those ad tech orders, those advertising orders, and pump them into the CRM. So we had to figure out which CRM our customers were using, Salesforce, HubSpot. And I remember we only had Salesforce.
Right.
And so we could not monetize those customers that had a different CRM. And that was a critical piece of their functionality that they needed from us. So I remember that. I remember how it limited my addressable market, i.e. it limited my revenue.
Yeah. So you're solving a problem that's familiar and that you have a long, time working with it.
Yeah, I'd like to say that like my second language is API, which is a really geeky way to show how nerdy I am, I guess.
Yeah, no, I mean, APIs are a funny, weird thing because like everyone builds their own ideal API, on any side of whatever they build. I remember at IBM, before IBM, at SoftLayer, the SoftLayer guys that were in charge of like, I don't know, future-proofing cloud infrastructure as a business, the geeks in the back built out an API that had like 1,400 commands. And there was like all these calls and you could do some really cool stuff with it. Like you could get, as far as I remember, this is back in 2014 or 15, you could get a robot to build a actual server machine for you using the API and provision bare metal servers that were customized. So that was like some crazy, crazy server shit back then.
I don't think people understand how prevalent APIs are and how powerful they are because the world does run on API communication. This is how the internet works.
So the idea for anyone listening or watching this is that, and correct me if I'm wrong or add color to it, is that an application programming interface is simply the machine instruction codex for an application, let's call it, possibly, to allow machines to talk to each other and talk to each other from an instruction set basis. So it's like what we do through the web browser as humans is almost instructional, right? You're scrolling things, you're clicking on links, you're opening media, you might be interfacing with stuff like that. But on the back end of all of that, the browser, now I'm getting in a gray area there.
Well, the browser has to connect to some sort of server, right? And that server has an API. It's basically like the language of that server. And there's actually standards around this. The problem is everyone has their own dialect. And the other problem is much like language, where you can build a sentence, you can build this sentence in however you want.
Yeah.
Right? Does it make sense? It may make sense to you.
Right.
You understand Pig Latin and I understand like British English.
Yeah.
And maybe we can't speak.
Yeah.
And so what we've built, and so the way that I got here was by brute force building these connections, right? Looking at documentation and then building the translator for each one, right? The problem that we had in the last company was that we interfaced with 60 different. And so we had to build the translator 60 different times. And I'm like, this is not scalable. And so when we thought about building this new company and when we were starting to look at the market and how big this was, how important this was, but how many options there were, we're like, we can't keep doing that. First off, we can't hire so many people.
Yeah.
Right. And then
the juice isn't worth the squeeze.
What happens is something changes, something breaks. So there was a lot of problems that we learned from the previous set of companies going back even till the late 90s,
right,
where we were doing APIs. And so what we came up is a radically different way, which is to your point about a codex.
Mm-hmm.
We created a universal translation layer for the codex of APIs. We call it like an API DNA, right? So if you had two APIs, how could you describe the differences so that you can actually duplicate one,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we take that and we give it to what we've built, our architecture, and it figures out how to communicate.
Mm.
And so what that allows is it allows us to add new API integrations within 5 minutes, 10 minutes sometimes, super quick.
Yeah.
Instead of like coding them for like 3 months.
Right.
And even if you outsource this to
Does it fire off calls to whatever service you're connecting it to figure out like responses, or is it more like
no, it's not
it'll take
it's
the
trying to
instruction
guess.
set from an API and just automatically interpret that?
Yeah, there's several ways that we train the system.
Okay.
A lot of times there's API documentation. What
Sure.
we found is that more than 50% of the API documentation is incorrect
Yeah.
or obsolete or old.
Yeah.
And so there has to be some dynamic real-time assessment of the data,
Mm-hmm.
to your point. So there is this real-time analysis, validation of our assumptions. So there's several different ways, and we've actually built tools to actually build these integrations for us. So it's radically different than what we have done in the past.
Yeah, that's cool.
And so it gives our customers a lot of benefits because they come to us and as you know, there's like, let's say 100 different CRMs out there.
Oh my God.
There's so many. There's so many HRIS systems
Oh.
out there.
Yes.
And so they come to us and they go, we have a customer, it's a big customer, and they're on XYZ and we don't support it. And so can you add that? Because you support 20 of the top CRMs.
Yeah.
Can you add this one? And we're like, sure. And we'll actually do it within that hour that we're on the phone with them sometimes.
That's crazy.
And we'll get back to them and like, here you go. And that's just because of the architecture that we built. So it's all because of the fact that my CTO co-founder and I have all of this experience at building this, going through the hardships of maintaining them.
Yeah.
So when I talk to entrepreneurs, I ask them, why you? Why are you doing this? And why you? Why are you going to win? And I think this is why we wanted to do this, because why us? There's almost nobody out there that has gone through the trenches of building these things, understanding the pain points, like my co-founder and I have.
And sorry, who are your customers for this?
SaaS companies.
And you're in market.
So yeah, we launched back in June-ish.
Okay.
This
summer.
This summer. We've been in market since September. And we've been closing customers. We have about 131 different integrations in the portfolio, and we've just expanded to. So we started off with sales, CRM, so Salesforce, HubSpot. We expanded to HR like Workday and Bamboo. We expanded then to recruiting, so ATSs, applicant tracking systems, and just recently expanded to accounting. So QuickBooks, Xero, that kind of stuff. And we focused on specific use cases, right? So recruiting is pretty hot right now for some reason. Recruiting has candidate assessment.
Yeah.
So you're assessing the candidates. You have candidate sourcing. You're finding candidates, job boards, finding candidates. So quite a lot of these use cases. And we focus on those. And we ask ourselves, much like we did with Calendar Euro, we talk to our customer and says, what are the problems of your day-to-day, right? So our customers are SaaS companies. Their problems are they need data in, they need data out, right? Specifically, right? So when we look at a specific use case, we know what kind of data they need. They need the jobs from the ATS of their customer into their system. Then they need to create an application. Well, once they do their magic, they find a candidate, let's say, they need to create an application and push it back. So that's very specific, right, to that one use case. And by the way, there's like 100 different candidate assessment companies in North America. It's massive.
Right.
And so as we expand, we look at these use cases and we make sure that we check the box. Yes, we support this. We have all the top companies. So I think that's how you get to success, not, to your point, just building technology for technology's sake because it's cool.
Have you been having fun the last few months?
I love this phase We have
I
four.
love this face. You're like,
I
but I'm gonna hate next year.
no. I love and hate, right? So we have four great people. We've all worked together in the past.
Okay.
It's a really nice number. I remember the last company when we had four. It was one of my favorite times.
Yeah.
Right. And then, we got more funding and then we grew and it became different.
Right.
It has to.
Right.
And so we're really tight. We're super fast. Love that. But I can't lie. I mean, it's hard to build a company.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to build a company in 2023 for sure. It's probably the best time and the worst time. It's the best time because you don't have the distraction of millions of dollars being thrown at you like you did during the .COVID era. But that's obviously the bad part. You have to actually execute. You have to be very capital efficient. You have to go after customers and get revenue. That's the way it should have always been. I wasn't like that before at all. I was like, with plentiful of investors, you sort of get ahead of your skis, right? I think now you're forced to be down on the ground. And that's what we're doing today.
Yeah. I sorry, I'm smiling. I always find, from my headspace, I always find it funny when I hear it explained that way because, again, like we were saying at the beginning, I've pretty much always in every business, taken a bootstrap approach.
And I have not.
Yeah.
And I always I was proud of that.
Yeah.
And, nothing against bootstrapping. I love that.
Well, you can't do certain things when you have to focus on cash flow, you just can't. You can't. There's so many ways that I could lever various things in my company if I had cash. And it's like staff, access to market, even simple little things like flying to Dubai for some meetings, that you can't do. I have to put that off for a year. But at the same time, with the rigor comes and the discipline of focusing entirely on cash flow, also comes a lot of surprise and delight.
I agree, and I'm. Am I liking this better than the way I ran my previous companies? Maybe in some ways. Mm-hmm. I feel prouder of the accomplishments.
Right.
I worry obviously about runway. I always worry about runway. It's when you get acquired. The one thing that I remember the most is not like maybe getting a check in the mail kind of thing. Mm. It's actually not having to worry about payroll.
Right.
Right. And so when you're dealing with issues of runway because funding is not plentiful like it is in 2023, you're always thinking about that even more. So that's not the fun part. But I do believe that the company is being built better than any previous company that I've ever built, just because we're being forced to look at the fundamentals. Yeah. Right. We're being much more disciplined to use that word.
So as someone who has been an entrepreneur, who has seen a couple of companies, through an acquisition, and who also spends time, from what I understand, mentoring other founders, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pay it forward.
The looking forward, because we're just about at the end of the year, looking forward into 2024, do you have particular things that you are advising people of to be cautious of, or different ways that they could change their business in 2024 if they're starting something new?
Yeah, I mean, not to be a downer, but it's like focus on your customers, get the revenue.
Yeah.
Focus on being capital efficient.
Yeah.
Right. That's my main message. And it's not because we're going through it, but because I've talked to so many entrepreneurs who may have a great idea, but they're waiting for funding to execute. It's like, don't.
That's stupid.
You have to get out there and you have to, we're back to eating ramen. We used to be there, and all of a sudden we got, thrown lots of money and, spoiled. And now it's back to eating ramen to get, and I think this is good because it forces the bad companies to go away. Mm-hmm. And it forces us to focus on what's important, which is the real metrics of the company.
What can you offer as insight into the venture capital world, at least here in Canada, for those same companies who may be kind of anticipating around the corner a raise or needing capital even for their business model? Let's say it's something deep science and
I think if you're in the top of your industry, you should be able to get funding.
Right, I agree.
If you're doing AI, You should be able to get funding, lots of funding. Anyone else is kind of screwed. And I think more so, I love Canada. I don't want to move, but it is what it is. We are more risk adverse. Our VCs are more risk adverse. They may or may not have less cash in their funds. And so it is what it is. We live here because we love it here.
Mm-hmm.
We could be living in the valley or whatever, right? Dubai, where there's more money and maybe less risk averseness. Right. I was just in San Francisco, and I spoke to 20 different VCs. They are cautious, but they're optimistic,
Mm-hmm.
right? And their wallets are sort of open. There's not a hell of a lot of deal flow closing, but much more so than what I've heard and seen here,
Right.
outside of those two. So again, the top in the industry, the market is definitely getting funded, and then AI. And that's about it. So it's just going to take a lot longer than we expect. There's a lot more shit companies that got massive amount of money
Yeah.
that need to be flushed out.
Yeah. I mean,
Right.
this is what's been going on for so long now.
The
The last
LPs,
decade, man.
the limited partners aren't getting their money back.
No.
There's no IPOs. There's no acquisitions. When there are acquisitions, it's for 10 cents on the dollar.
Yeah.
The money is not coming back to those investors. It's not coming back then to the VC funds because they're not getting new funds. Kind of like 2008.
Yeah.
And then that means the VCs don't know when they're going to raise next. So they're holding on to their fund a lot tighter.
I feel like we're also, if you take a step back, we're in a very interesting era because if people are starting companies that are technology companies, software companies, without the expectation of a need to scale that to some sort of ubiquity for the reason of the flip and, going public and like making $1 billion. And instead they're focused on, this is a phrase people don't like in startups, lifestyle businesses. If you're starting a company to make, and your lifestyle could be lush, right? But let's say you start a company with the aim of, I'm going to make $1 million a year for myself, right? And I'm going to keep the business to a certain size, and I'm going to calculate the organizational structure from day one and figure out, reverse engineer kind of that growth path. And let's say you have a great product, you know how to sell it, right? So you're kind of creating that whole thing from scratch. You're planning your business. But if you plan it to be bootstrapped or at least revenue growth based, with solid, customers from day one that you can acquire and scale within a means, I think there's a greater opportunity to do that and do that in a sustainable way today than there ever has been.
I would agree. I think there's so many opportunities for you to do that lifestyle business. Take what you know and that maybe nobody else knows or that you're one of the experts in, right? Do a masterclass, open up a Shopify store. I know so many people that they're basically have moved away from the corporate life to running a bunch of tiles, from wherever, and making a decent business out of and growing that.
Yeah.
Obviously it's not just like, build a Shopify store and they come. That's
Right,
bullshit.
right.
But, these people are actually understand marketing and promotion, all this. But yeah, you can do that today, I think better than you can at any point. And I think back to, I was talking about doom and gloom about there's no funding, but on the flip side of that, and in relation to this, there's so many other ways that you can get people to work with you. You don't have to go out and spend $150,000 a year to hire an engineer in downtown Toronto or downtown New York, right?
What are the alternatives?
Those days are sort of gone because now COVID allowed us to think globally, to think remote first. And that was a massive shift because before we were constrained to the physical space, an office in a city. And if you didn't live there, you couldn't get hired for that company. So you weren't hiring the best and you were certainly not hiring the cheapest, right? If you lived, again,
In an expensive city
area.
with immigration controls, right? Like you can't just bring in people instantly to fill that job.
Right. So that was the other option. You'd transport them over. Not great either. And so today you could hire anyone in around the world. You can hire the best person for that one thing that you're doing. Doesn't matter where they are. Doesn't matter what time zone.
Yeah.
And that allows you a lot more flexibility. It also allows you to lower your costs, typically if they're outside of, say, Western Europe, North America, right? So you see quite a lot of what I would call time zonal hires, which is like in North America, that means South America, right? So you're hiring an engineer, software engineer
Yep.
in Brazil for like half. But then, of course, you can always go and hire someone, a marketing specialist for whatever, who lives in whatever.
So as a 20-year now resident of Toronto, 20-year plus, where do you see, as you mentioned, we become this kind of tech hub in a sense. There's a lot of startup companies based here. There's a lot of tech innovation. We're commercializing research from the universities in the region and all this stuff. A lot of potentiality for even just that, I think, in the next decade. But how does that pair against this remote first culture? And, in terms of talking about the sustainability of that growth momentum in our tech ecosystem.
I think, like I said before, Toronto's going through this pivotal moment of deciding what it wants to be next.
Mm-hmm.
It moved from this very kind of boring city in the late 90s, 80s to an immigration destination in the last 10 years. A lot of tech migrants, basically, from all over the world, and also here, homegrown. And I think as we grow, what I'm seeing is that because of COVID, because we spent so much time in our home and we want our neighborhoods to be interesting, the nice thing about Toronto is that Toronto is really a city of 200 neighborhoods.
Right.
We are villages, basically. We hang out in our village, our neighborhood, and we like to stay there. And this is, I think, maybe different from other cities. It's not, when you live outside of Toronto in Canada, and you look at Toronto, you're like, it's a big ass city. It's full of cars and pollution. It's not. It is full of cars and pollution.
But it doesn't feel
But
like
it really is 200 different distinct neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
The issue that I see now is because we've been accustomed to staying home and going for walks and hanging out in our restaurants and all this, we want that to continue. We basically want a livable, walkable city.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work when we have more and more immigration, which we cannot change, where everyone has a car, right? Can we bicycle to work? Can we walk to work? Does having these Startwell offices, mini offices all over each neighborhood work?
Yeah.
So I go
Hubs, kind of
there,
collaboration
hubs,
suites. Yeah.
instead of going to one massive office downtown with, 2 million other people
Right.
every 9 a.m. So I think we have to rethink that. And I think a lot of cities are probably going through this, but I think Toronto is having both issues, the growing issue, plus also now this whole lifestyle issue.
Right.
We don't want to go back to the office.
Right.
And especially in a city like Toronto, that takes an hour at least to get in.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense.
I agree with you. And actually, we're seeing that as Startwell's doubled down in the last, really since 2019, right? And then I changed a bunch of stuff during the pandemic to help for this in terms of Kasim running around with a screwdriver and fixing things. But our real estate mix in 2019 was 50% bookable space on demand and common space, and 50% offices and co-working dedicated areas like workspace, focused workspace, workstations. I flipped it, and now we only have maybe 5% of the square footage is office space. The rest is all bookable meeting space, and it's all turnkey with AV. I've built out all this AV. We include stationery and everything. So what Startwell really is now is primarily a destination meeting space where meetings could be different types of things like corporate gatherings, right?
I think that flexibility is important because I think everyone wants to work slightly different because we've seen the Pandora is out, right? That when we all went home during COVID, we all understood that actually this is pretty cool. If I can build a home office and then I can get outside and go to my local restaurant and hang out with my friends.
People started questioning what their lifestyle actually is and what they want it to be.
Yeah.
And we're given the opportunity by the situation to start saying, well, how do I want to live? And then, these topics of how do I want my city to afford that type of livability is the next step for sure. And hopefully civic engagement goes up, and all this stuff to change. But
I think infrastructure, I think the way that we commute transport ourselves. I think that's super important. If that doesn't get resolved, I think we will see people leaving.
Yeah.
Because again, you don't have to be here. You can live in Collingwood,
Right.
which is one of the fastest growing cities in Canada. People are going there because it is quieter, and they can work. They can work for a Toronto-based company over there.
Mm-hmm.
But having said that, I think Toronto's an amazing city. I think it will fix itself.
Yeah.
There's a lot of issues that we Torontonians complain about, but there is still a huge amount of immigration.
Yeah.
And you just have to step back and wonder why. We are living in an amazing country, an amazing city, full of
Absolutely.
opportunity.
Agreed. Thanks for spending time.
Yeah, I'm very welcome. Thank you for inviting.
Yeah, man.